Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And not one of the more upbeat weeks I've ever experienced. We'll start with something that doesn't really affect me too much or many of our listeners. It's kind of like, hello, what else do you think happens? There's a huge credibility just crumbling at CNN and MSNBC. That's not really a shock, and also ratings crumbling, but I like the credibility gap, and I think that should be not a shock to our listeners or you, Dr. Lopkin, correct?
No, not a shock at all. I mean, we've talked about this, going back to our days on terrestrial radio. These organizations are not news gathering organizations. They're arms of the Democratic Party, and they are there for propaganda.
And I agree with you, but we've talked about it before, but I think it's still worthy of discussion, not a lengthy discussion. But they were always trimming around the edges. But during the Trump administration, they just threw out any form of credit. I look at Anderson Cooper. He's got the glasses, and he's so sincere. He's just a propaganda minister. Has anyone probed, done an expose on Biden's mental capability? They hid the guy in a basement. They did a disservice to the American people and probably the world, because the toughest question they asked him is, what kind of ice cream do you like? Your comment?
Yeah. They decided they hated Trump. They could not accept the fact that their darling Hillary Clinton was, soundly beaten in the election by Trump. So they spent 4 years trying to discredit him. Then they propped up Biden because basically they just wanted Trump out of there, instead of looking into Biden's mental state, Hunter Biden's criminal past. And now we are stuck without leadership. We have no leadership from the president. We have no leadership from a vice president.
No, it's a very scary
everything
time.
Was covered up.
Absolutely. And there's videos that are funny but not so funny. There's one of Biden getting off the helicopter one, whatever the heck, the Marine one, and he literally starts walking. He walks to the bushes, and there's another one of him in Europe at a cafe, and he just, you're talking, he makes Weekend at Bernie's look like a Beatles concert. I mean, it's like, whoa. It's really kind of not funny. It's scary.
When the G7 met in person, the foreign press reported widely how inept Biden was, the fact that he did not appear to be mentally fit, and yet, CNN and MSNBC kept trying to hide it, kept trying to cover it up. Honestly, I mean, they have so little credibility. I was amazed when they started criticizing him over Afghanistan.
Yeah, I guess my question to you would be, you can't hide this forever. I really believe behind closed doors, they're talking about how they roll this out, because every time, and the chutzpah, people are dead. People are dying because of your screw up. And you don't take questions? I mean, and then you show up at the coming home ceremony, a very solemn event, and you're looking at your watch. Yeah, you're looking at your watch. How cold? And I guess my point in all this, all this crap about Lunch Pail Joe and Joe of the people is a bunch of BS. He's a cold, calculating bureaucrat.
Yes, he is. It's not even that he looked at his watch once. He looked at his watch after every coffin was offloaded. The Gold Star families were appalled. Many of them decided they didn't want to talk to him at all. Several that did talk to him let him have it. And several of those Gold Star families that did talk to him later reported he was more interested in talking about his son than what had happened to theirs.
Yeah, no question about it. One thing, Ronald Reagan, if it was an act, it was an act, but at least people expect that and appreciate it. During the Columbia disaster and, other situations like that, he would take the time. He wasn't talking about, when I was on a movie and I broke my leg, it really hurt. And I understand what hurt is. I mean, stop it. And I'm, and this whole thing, about us always reflecting on Bo. We've all had losses. I'm not minimizing it, but that's not the time to bring it up. If I was at a friend of mine's father's funeral, I'm not going to talk about when my parents died it's not appropriate.
No, it's not. And I honestly think that it is evidence of his dementia. I think he's been focusing on Bo because that's what he remembers. I don't think he is cognizant of everything that's going on. Unfortunately, remember prior to the election, Nancy Pelosi had made a big deal about investigating the 25th Amendment, about removing a president when they're not competent. And I think this backfired because I honestly believe they planned to use the 25th Amendment and put Kamala Harris in charge. But Harris has been shown to be so stupid and so incompetent that their hands are tied. They can't do that.
And that brings us to another issue worthy of discussion. And this is what happens when the United States has a vacuum of leadership. It happened during the Carter administration, but let me be clear. Never to this extent. Never, ever, ever in modern history has it been this bad in terms of a total vacuum of any kind of direction. So because of that, the nuclear clock that many of you are aware of, and I'm sure Dr. Lopkin, you're aware of that, is basically, let's say when the Cold War ended, it went back to like 20 of 12. I mean, it was almost
hang on a second. Hang on a second, because we do have some younger viewers and people haven't talked about the doomsday clock for a while. So let's define what this is. After Hiroshima, a symbolic clock was put together with midnight being the point of nuclear war. And over the years, the time has been pushed back. It's been pushed up. The closer you get to midnight on the doomsday clock, the more dangerous things are.
Perfect. Yes, well said. And just to put it in perspective, the closest we came to it was 1 minute before 12 was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, also during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Yes, now we are at that level. I think we're 2 minutes to 12 because of the lack of leadership that we have. Like you said, we don't have a vice president. We don't have a president. We have a band of fools, the usual suspects, people like Lopkin that got us into the Iran nuclear deal and other malfeasance. So the world sees there's no policeman, there's no one in charge. And is it surprising to you, Dr. Lopkin, that we're 2 minutes to 12?
No, it really isn't. Because you have China, who's been working on their nuclear arsenal. You have Pakistan, who, let's face it, Pakistan is very closely allied with the Taliban. So they have nuclear capabilities. It was just reported this week that North Korea has restarted enriching plutonium to build nuclear weapons. They had not been doing this throughout the entire Trump administration. So all of our adversaries now look at the U.S. as a failed state, that we are not going to be able to do anything to them. And our allies, unfortunately, agree with them. They're working among themselves to figure out what to do, but our allies have decided they cannot rely on us.
Of course they can. And, looking historically, you had Chamberlain and that era when you had, appeasers, and Chamberlain wasn't really having his A game. He was actually suffering from cancer. That's where, whenever there's a vacuum of power, you're going to get a situation where you have basically foes taking advantage of it. But what scares me even more than that, Dr. Lopkin and our listeners, is miscalculations, because you have someone that's obviously not in control of his mental capabilities or faculties. So let's say China tries to take over Taiwan. Instead of diffusing the situation, someone like that, you can see that he gets angry. You can see that he's prone to snap decisions. I'm talking about Biden. You could have 0 to 60, meaning instead of sending some carriers or going right to the ultimate decision. Am I not so far off base?
No, you're not far off at all. And it's also important to note that those sudden fits of anger are a textbook symptom of dementia. So, the more we see of him, the more obvious it is that he is not in command of his mental faculties. How many times over the past several weeks has he made a comment at a press conference about instructions that he was given? He's not supposed to take questions, or he was told to call on certain people. It's very obvious that he's not in charge.
If he was not in charge, which he's not in charge, but there's like 8th graders that would have a higher level of cognitive ability in terms of, if someone tells you, you're in a business situation, hey, Dr. Lopkin, make sure that you call on, Jack Smith. You don't walk out on the podium and say, I was told to call on Jack Smith.
Right.
The only thing that I thought was funny about that, I think it was Nora O'Donnell, that he says, I got to call on Nora.
Yes.
Her credibility just went to the crapper. Obviously, she's a willing stooge, because
Nora O'Donnell's credibility has always been in question. And in fact, as when CBS named her as managing editor and anchor of the CBS Evening News, their ratings plummeted, and they have not come back.
Of course they have. I've always had a problem with her. I really do. I have to confess. And it's not just her. It's these people that were born on third base and thought they hit a triple. I mean, it's like I'm sure she went to the final. Her biggest problem was her prom dress didn't quite fit. I mean, come on. She's up there. God knows who her father or mother was. She didn't get, she went to the best schools, got the job, and she's not exactly, I'm sorry to say, I know it's earth-shattering, doesn't seem like she's the brightest bulb in the Christmas tree either. She's not dumb, but she's not the greatest interviewer I've ever. She's not worthy of that position, is my point.
Well, she's definitely not worthy of that position, but she's also a Democratic stooge. I mean, before she was managing editor of an anchor of CBS Evening News, she was the main anchor on the morning news on CBS This Morning. And they would routinely, during the Trump administration, have Adam Schiff come on. Adam Schiff would lie through his teeth, and they would just let him do it. That is not a reporter. A reporter questions and calls people. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. If you are a reporter, it is your job to challenge what is being said, especially when it's obvious it's a lie. Like Adam Schiff was still saying that Trump colluded with the Russians after he was cleared by the Mueller investigation.
Well, that was his 15 minutes of fame. The guy who never got a date in high school, he was all of a sudden, he was Elvis Presley, enough about him. Speaking about declining stars, there's Bill Kristol of the National Review. I remember when I was a young pup in the 80s, and the New Republican, I used to read his publications. He used to be on ABC, Good Morning, the Sunday show, okay? And I used to really like him. So he was on CNN saying let's be clear for our listeners, we are not referring to Billy Crystal, the actor and comedian. Thank you. Good point. Very good point. No, he was the editor-in-chief of the National Review. He was during the Reagan administration, he was amazing. And then he became a neocon. And then he became one of the Lincoln Project people, someone that was against Trump. So he said on CNN, well, because of Biden's, actions in Afghanistan, I may not vote. And you admitted you voted. I mean, if you don't like Trump, just don't vote. I mean, I think he's so needy of being into the spotlight that he knew that Trump overshadowed him in his only way, and that's how disgusting the swamp is. Am I not correct? Now he can be back on the spotlight as the counter argument.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous that anybody with his conservative background would even consider voting for Joe Biden, especially since it was well known, especially among Washington insiders, that he did not have his mental faculties, which meant basically you were voting for Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris, Biden, at least for a big part of his career, was relatively centrist,
Yes.
Especially early in his career. Kamala Harris has never pretended to be a centrist.
Yeah, but the thing about Biden now, he's not in control. We don't have to, beat a dead horse. He doesn't know. There's other people, Susan Rice and others, calling the shots. He doesn't know what day it is. So, he used to be basically a little left of center. Now it's whatever they tell him. Very interesting.
Well, no, it's more than that, because his Afghanistan policy was the same policy that he has been pushing since 9/11. So he actually did take control. We might have been better off if he hadn't and he had let the other people take control. But this was a policy he's been pushing for 20 years. He just wanted people out. And, we talked about this on a previous podcast where in 2008, when he was questioned about what this would do to the Afghani women, he said, F them, that's not our problem. So
yeah, Mr. Joe Lunchpail.
Right.
No, I agree with you.
He's capable of taking control, but it's disastrous when he does.
Absolutely, no question about it. No question about it. And I believe that was a really good point you just made, because of all his actions in his administration, 98% of them had nothing to do with him. This 100%, I agree with you, was the only thing that he was adamant about. And obviously it was a huge screw up, 100% correct. Now, speaking of screw ups, there's now a new variant of the COVID virus that originated from Colombia, and it's not, the vaccines have really no effect on it. Pretty stupid, I'm sorry to be so blunt, to have an open borders policy, no matter what, during a pandemic. But given what's going on, and that's where you have a lack of leadership, Dr. Lopkin. He's not going to adjust on the fly. He's a political ideologue that's got dementia. He'll say open borders, hell or high water. Am I not correct? The hell with the American people.
That is true, but it's even more serious than that, because the Democrats have been pushing this as, well, if everybody had gotten vaccinated, then we would not have these variants coming up. We would have eliminated the virus. According to the World Health Organization, which, granted, not the brightest bulbs in the room, they were clearly stonewalled
they're not
ignored by the
at
Chinese.
Harvard Medical Center. No,
right.
They're not. Yeah,
but they are the ones who have been tracking all of these variants. And for those of you who don't know, these variants are named basically after the Greek letters. So mu, we have already gone through alpha, beta, gamma, delta, lambda, mu. That's where we are now. None of these variants started in the United States. So blaming people in the U.S. that did not get vaccinated is political bullshit.
Okay, wait a second. No, I agree with you, Dr. Lopkin, 100%. But again, if we had viable news agencies a la CNN and others, maybe that would blow the complete narrative wide open that only dumbasses and Trumpers and morons and knuckle draggers and non-Ivy League people don't get the vaccine. Correct?
Correct. I mean, now let's be clear. The vaccine limits the severity of, so far, all of the variants except Mu. So it is beneficial for everybody to get vaccinated. But the idea that if everybody in the US was vaccinated, suddenly this was going to go away, those variants aren't starting here.
No,
So,
and that's my point. No,
yes.
Dr. Lopkin, that was my exact point, is that they were blaming, and we both agree, everyone should be vaccinated. That's not even an issue. They should wear masks.
Right.
They should be vaccinated. But I know in the vernacular out there, people were talking, it's those damn people that didn't get vaccinated. That's why we're screwed up with the Delta and this and that. But that just blows holes in it.
There is no science behind that. And by the way, you just said everybody should be masked. We've said numerous times on this podcast that
with the right mask.
If at all possible, get an N95 masks.
Good advice.
But it's actually getting worse because we have looked at a number of masks being sold here in the United States, and a lot of them actually have warnings on the box itself that these masks will not stop viral infection. I saw one warning saying, do not use anywhere where infections are rampant. So, for God's sakes, please take a look at the masks you're buying and get effective
to restate
ones.
Things in its proper and a good point. We at Carnivore Bites are for masks, but we caution people to please get the right mask. Correct?
Yes.
And I think politically, how does this play out? Not about masks, but about the new variant. I mean, eventually, I think it's going to. There's going to be a call for closing the borders. And the other thing is, psychologically, economically, I'm not sure people are prepared for another shutdown. God knows I'm not.
No, the U.S. is not prepared for another shutdown. Economically, remember, we talked about this back during the shutdown. Now, I think the death toll from COVID, all of the variants, is approximately 200,000 people have passed away in the United States. However, we have also seen almost 8 million families be unable to afford food. So the economic, when we say an economic impact, this is not, oh, well, Johnny's going to have to wait a year before he gets a new video game. This is families unable to feed themselves. And we are not prepared to go back into lockdown. And the Democrats right now are pushing this $3.5 trillion human infrastructure. We don't have the money to pay for that. If this passes, how are they then going to come up with the money to reinstate unemployment benefits to help those in need? We don't have the money.
Well, we can always print. I mean, we got the ink to print. The problem is what happens to inflation that's going to hurt the middle class. The whole thing gets back, Dr. Lopkin, to leadership, doesn't it? You don't have someone that can adjust on the fly. You don't have anyone that's intellectually capable of making relatively simple deductions. What we've gone over is not basic rocket science. It's simple blocking and tackling, and anyone with an IQ above, let's say, 100 should be able to understand that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, these are simple decisions that Biden has been unable to make. I mean, if you talk to anybody in the military, generals, joint chiefs, down to privates and corporals, every one of them will tell you, if you are leaving a battlefield, civilians go first, equipment goes second, the military pulls out last. And what did Biden do? He pulled out the military, left over $1 billion in military equipment there.
Well over a billion, like 30 billion.
And by the way, the Biden administration keeps saying, well, we still have influence over the Taliban because they want access to the monetary system. Do you really believe if the Taliban turned to Russia and China and said, we've got $1 billion in weapons there, would you like to buy it? You think either one of them's not going to hand the Taliban $1 billion?
The whole thing is the biggest bunch of BS ever. Go ahead.
And then past the equipment being left there, we left our people behind. We left American citizens who want to get out. Biden has been saying, everybody who wanted to leave had the opportunity. There is actually a class of students from a California school, not a college, this is a public school system, that was on a trip to Afghanistan. Why any school system would send kids to Afghanistan at this point, I don't know. But they are still there. They are trapped there, abandoned by the Biden administration. So any claim he has that everybody that wanted to get out was able to get out is a complete lie.
The thing is first of all, it's not even a sophisticated line of bullshit. That I can actually appreciate. Might not respect, but I can appreciate it for its spin doctory. But how dumb do you have to be? It's like saying, there was a house fire, and, I know 3 or 4 people burned to death, but they didn't want to leave. What?
Yeah,
what? What are you talking about? Yeah, there was an earthquake, and some of the people wanted to stay.
And more of his lies are coming out because, first of all, we had media on the ground, so we all saw the pictures. I mean, the Biden administration is essentially saying, well, who are you going to believe, us or your own eyes? But more is coming out. There was a Reuters report. They had a transcript of a phone call between Biden and Karzai prior to the evacuation where Biden said, regardless of what the Taliban is doing, we have to make it look like they're losing.
Oh, yeah, that's what you have when you have a career politician, not particularly bright. That's what he's 40 years. There's no balance sheet. There's no performance. It's keeping power. That's what he knows, and that's where we are today. But the last point I wanted to make and throw out at you and our listeners is and it's not any great revelation, but there's increasing calls for resignations. Miley Cyrus, who I just saw recently, my God, Patton, he is not. Oh, my God. And then Lopkin, the genius who created the Iran nuclear deal. And then there's also Miley Cyrus's assistant, whatever his name, another real genius. They're calling for their resignations. Do you think it happens? First of all, do you think it's appropriate? And second, do you think it's going to happen?
Is it appropriate? Absolutely. I think we need a clean sweep of these people who were responsible for this catastrophe. Is it going to happen? I honestly don't think so, because we have had Democrats who, behind closed doors, it's been reported that they're questioning Biden. They want an investigation. They want us to go back in and pull the remaining people out, despite what the Taliban has said. And when this gets in public, when the motion to vote on this came up on the House floor, the Democrats folded, and they would not let it come to a vote. They refused to stand by these principles. So as long as the Democrats control the House, I don't think any of this is going to happen. Now, that being said, we've said over and over again on this podcast that historically speaking, we know the Republicans are going to take both the House and the Senate in the midterm elections next year. Now, the Democrats are actually expecting double-digit turnover. They know they have lost a lot of their base, and this is not going to go away. So when the Republicans take power in both the House and the Senate, then we might see some changes happen.
I have to ask you one more question because, again, you have a amazingly great point. Washington is about power, less about allegiances, okay? People turned on Nixon. Goldwater turned on Nixon in 1973. I really believe a couple more screw-ups, which is inevitable. People are looking for covering their own ass. I see any chance of any great initiatives of Biden going south until 2022. What do you think?
I'm actually not sure because Biden has actually had very little to do with the Democratic initiatives. While all of this has been going on in Afghanistan, Pelosi has been pushing to force through that $3.5 trillion infrastructure deal.
Okay, my point is, though, it doesn't have the same draw that it once did. In other words, you got people pissed off. The infrastructure bill, I don't think was overall all that popular to begin with, and they see, it's a guilt by association. You're part of a screw up. You want to divorce yourself from that screw up, and I think Democrats are going to do that. Not everyone, but some. Enough.
No. Some Democrats will definitely back away from Biden. As a positive effect of that, this gives Manchin cover. So he can now stand up against all of the progressives and go, look what happened. So hopefully anything that goes past the House dies in the Senate.
Even the reconciliation. Well, great podcast. Not the cheeriest one we've ever done, but we need to report what's going on, Dr. Lopkin. And on a more cheery note, we're gaining steam, aren't we, on the Carnivore Bites podcast?
We are. We're gaining listeners every week, and you can catch us at xvadio.com/podcasts on the Carnivore Radio website, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin, and thank our listeners. We'll be back next week. Take care.
See you then.